Most people who fail at container gardening make the same mistake before they even plant a single seed. They put a layer of gravel or broken pottery in the bottom of the pot because someone told them it improves drainage. It does the exact opposite. Water doesn't move easily from fine potting soil into coarse gravel until the soil above is fully saturated. So that gravel layer actually raises the waterlogged zone right into the root system, and it quietly kills the plant from below, weeks before anyone notices anything is wrong. If you've ever grown a tomato in a container and watched it struggle for no obvious reason, that gravel layer might be exactly why. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll know exactly which 15 vegetables give you the biggest harvest from the smallest possible space and the specific mistakes that quietly wreck yields for almost everyone who tries this. Quick note before we get into it. If you're serious about growing more food in less space, hit subscribe now because this channel is entirely built around getting you bigger harvests without needing a backyard. Let's start with the plant almost everyone grows first, and almost everyone grows wrong. Number 1. The tomato. And this is where most container gardens are won or lost before the plant even flowers. A cherry tomato variety like Tiny Tim or Tumbling Tom will happily produce in a single 1-gallon pot. But if you want the classic slicing tomato experience, you need at least 3 to 5 gallons of soil and a container that's 12 to 18 inches deep. Compact varieties like Patio, Celebrity, and Superbush were literally bred for this kind of confinement, and they'll still throw heavy clusters of fruit even though their root zone is tiny compared to a garden bed. Here's the part almost nobody does correctly. Your stake or cage needs to go into the soil on the same day you transplant the seedling. If you wait until the plant is established and then jam a stake in later, you tear through the root system you just spent weeks building, and the plant stalls out trying to repair itself instead of making fruit. Once the plant hits about 12 inches tall, start tying the main stem loosely to that support using something soft, like a strip of cotton fabric or sisal twine. Never anything that can cut into the stem as it thickens. And if you're growing an indeterminate variety, you'll notice small shoots popping up in the crotch between the main stem and the side branches. Pinch those suckers out. It feels counterintuitive to remove healthy growth, but it forces the plant to pour its energy into fruit instead of leaves you'll never eat. One more thing that catches people off guard. Tomatoes need nighttime temperatures to stay above 55 degrees for the pollen to actually develop properly. If a cold snap hits during flowering, you'll watch blossoms drop off the vine for no apparent reason, and now you know exactly why. When harvest time comes, resist the urge to pick the moment a tomato turns fully red. Fruit left on the vine 1 or 2 extra days develops noticeably more sugar, and since you're not shipping it across the country like a grocery store tomato, there's no reason to rush it. Picture that for a second. Walking out onto your own patio in July, twisting off a tomato that's still warm from the sun, and eating it standing right there before it ever sees a kitchen counter. That's the entire reason this list exists. But the plant right next to it plays by completely different rules. Number 2 is the pepper, and it's the most forgiving crop on this entire list. Though almost nobody realizes it's also one of the slowest. You can fit 1 or 2 plants into a 2 to 5 gallon container that's 8 to 12 inches deep, and varieties like Lady Belle, Gypsy, and Jalapeno were selected specifically for their compact, branching habit. Peppers do double duty on a balcony because the plant itself looks ornamental while it's quietly loading up with fruit, which is part of why they've become such a popular patio crop over the last few decades. The catch is patience. Depending on the variety, peppers can take up to 110 to 120 days from seed to harvest, nearly double the timeline of a fast tomato. So if you're the type of gardener who checks a plant every morning expecting progress, this one will test you. Give them a full 6 hours of direct sun minimum because shaded peppers will produce thin walls and disappointing yields. And just like tomatoes, peppers are solanaceous crops, which means their fruit set depends heavily on stable, warm nighttime temperatures. If you're up on a high-rise balcony without much insect traffic, don't just wait around hoping for pollination. Gently shake the flower clusters during the warm part of midday, or use a small soft brush to move pollen from the flower's male anthers to its female stigma yourself. It takes 30 seconds, and it can dramatically increase how much fruit actually sets. Here's a mistake that trips up even experienced gardeners. Over-fertilizing peppers with a nitrogen-heavy feed gives you a gorgeous leafy plant that produces almost no fruit because you've essentially told the plant to grow leaves instead of babies. Once flowering starts, ease off nitrogen and let a balanced feed take over. I've had gardeners message me convinced their pepper plant was diseased because it looked perfect and never fruited. And almost every time the culprit was a well-meaning dose of an all-purpose fertilizer meant for leafy greens, not fruiting crops. Number 3 is where this list stops feeling like every other container gardening video because okra almost never makes it onto these rankings, and that's a mistake. It's the plant that built Southern American cooking, and full-size varieties can top 7 feet, which is exactly why most people assume it's off-limits for a pot. Dwarf varieties change that completely. Baby Bubba tops out around 3 to 4 feet and matures in about 53 days, while Cajun Delight finishes in 50 to 55, both short enough to skip staking altogether. Okra develops a long taproot in open ground, but in a container it adapts, needing only a 5-gallon pot that's 10 to 12 inches deep, and a single plant is enough since it doesn't need a second one nearby for pollination. Give it a full 6 to 8 hours of sun and temperatures between 75 and 95 degrees, and choose a black or dark-colored pot if you can, because okra is a heat lover and a dark container banks extra warmth right at the root zone. Here's the mistake that trips up almost everyone who tries this for the first time. The pods go from perfect to inedible in about 2 days. Harvest them at 2 to 4 inches long because anything longer turns tough, stringy, and genuinely unpleasant to eat, no matter how good the plant looks. And the same nitrogen trap that ruins pepper harvests applies here too. Feed it too much nitrogen, and you'll get a jungle of leaves with almost nothing to show for it underneath. Number 4 is the plant almost nobody has heard of, and it might be the biggest surprise on this entire list. The ground cherry, sometimes called a husk cherry, wrapped in its own papery little lantern that looks almost decorative until you realize what's hiding inside. These have been grown in American gardens since the 1600s, and they still fly completely under the radar compared to everything else on this list. Each fruit ripens inside that husk, and here's the part that changes how you garden entirely. You don't pick a ground cherry. You wait for it to fall. When it's ready, it simply drops to the soil on its own, husk and all, which means harvesting is less like picking produce and more like a daily scavenger hunt under the leaves. A single plant in a 5-gallon, roughly 10-inch deep container is enough, spaced about 2 to 3 square feet if you're growing more than one, and it'll sprawl low and bushy rather than climbing, so a simple tomato cage keeps the fruit up off wet soil. Give it a full 6 to 8 hours of sun and expect around 70 to 75 days from transplant to that first golden drop. The flavor is the reason people become obsessed once they try it. A strange, genuinely convincing mix of pineapple and vanilla that tastes nothing like anything else in a vegetable garden. One warning worth remembering: an unripe ground cherry is still green and still inside a green husk, and eating it before that husk dries to a papery tan is not just underwhelming, it's mildly toxic, the same soanine compound found in unripe tomatoes. Let the husk dry out and pale, let the fruit drop on its own, and you'll understand immediately why gardeners who discover this plant almost never stop growing it. Now here's where it gets interesting, because the next 4 vegetables aren't about heavy fruit at all. They're about something almost nobody thinks to do with a container garden, running it like a rotation instead of a single planting. Number 5 is leaf lettuce, and it's the plant that teaches the single most useful trick in this entire video. Instead of filling an entire 1 to 2 gallon container with lettuce all at once, only sow the first third of the space. A week or two later, sow the next third. A week after that, sow the final third. As you harvest the earliest section, you immediately re-sow it, and that closed loop keeps producing fresh lettuce continuously instead of giving you one giant harvest, followed by nothing. Varieties like black-seeded Simpson, butter crunch, and salad bowl mature in just 30 to 35 days and only need 4 to 6 hours of sun, which makes them ideal for a partially shaded corner most other vegetables would struggle in. It's a cut-and-come-again crop too, so harvesting the outer leaves and letting the center keep growing stretches a single planting even further. The mistake almost everyone makes is planting lettuce once in early spring and assuming that's it for the season. It bolts and turns bitter once summer heat arrives, so treating it as a rotating short-cycle crop rather than a one-time planting is what actually keeps a steady supply on your plate. Take that same rotation habit and apply it to spinach, and you get a plant that solves a completely different problem, timing rather than volume. It only needs a shallow 1 to 2 gallon container, 4 to 6 inches deep, because its root system barely goes anywhere. Varieties like Bloomsdale and Melody mature in 35 to 45 days, and it actually prefers the cooler months, which makes it the plant you reach for in early spring or late fall when everything else is either finished or hasn't started yet. Because the roots stay so shallow, spinach tucks into odd corners other crops can't use. Even a window box that only gets a few hours of light. Harvest the outer leaves first, let the center rosette keep going, and once daytime temperatures settle into the 70s, expect it to bolt. That's your signal the window has closed until fall. A trick worth knowing, spinach shrugs off a light frost without any protection at all, so you can usually start it weeks before the date printed on the seed packet. Swiss chard takes that cold weather logic and turns it upside down, because this is the plant that keeps going when the heat should have killed it. Chard is unusually heat tolerant compared to most greens, which means it keeps producing steadily through conditions that send lettuce or spinach into premature bolting. Grown one plant per 8-inch deep container holding 1 to 2 gallons. Varieties like Fordhook Giant reward you with a genuinely long harvest window. Harvest only the outer leaves and let the center keep growing. And a single chard plant can realistically keep feeding you for months instead of giving you one big cut-and-done harvest. It's also one of the better-looking plants on this list, stems ranging from deep red to bright gold, depending on the variety, which is exactly why some gardeners grow it as much for the patio as for the plate. And if chard handles heat, kale is the one that actually wants the cold. This is the plant that gets better the worse the weather gets, which sounds backwards until you understand the mechanism. Kale needs a bit more room, a full 5 gallons and about 10 inches of depth, plants spaced 10 to 15 inches apart, and varieties like lacinato, curly, and red Russian mature in 55 to 65 days. Here's the part that surprises almost everyone the first time they hear it. Kale has a cold sweetening mechanism, converting stored starches into sugar specifically as a defense against freezing temperatures, staying productive down to as low as 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Most gardeners drag their containers indoors the second frost threatens. With kale, that's usually the wrong move, since leaving it outside through a cold snap often makes it taste better, not worse. Harvest the outer, older leaves and always leave the central growing point alone. And one plant can realistically carry you from early fall into the dead of winter. Here's a mistake I see constantly with new container growers, and it costs people more food than almost anything else on this list. They plant one thing, harvest it once, and consider the container finished. The next 4 vegetables prove that's leaving food on the table. Number 9, radishes, are proof that fast can beat big. They go from seed to harvest in as little as 21 to 35 days, needing nothing more than a container as small as a single pint up to 2 gallons, 4 to 6 inches deep. That speed makes them the perfect filler crop, tucked into the gaps around a slower grower like a tomato while it's still establishing itself, harvested and gone before that tomato ever needs the extra room. The mistake isn't growing them, it's crowding them. Skip the thinning step and you get a container full of leafy tops and almost no actual root because radishes need that 1 to 2 inches of breathing room to swell properly. Because the cycle is so short, you can realistically resow radishes every couple of weeks all season, making them one of the only crops here you can treat as a genuine, constant rotation. Carrots solve a problem you've probably run into without knowing why. In dense, rocky, or compacted ground soil, carrots split, fork, and twist as they fight their way around obstructions. Drop them into a container filled with loose, uniform potting mix, and that problem largely disappears. Give them a 1 to 2 gallon container with at least 8 inches of depth. Thin the seedlings to 2 to 3 inches apart, and varieties like Littlefinger or Nantes A Half Long will hand you straight, unblemished roots in 65 to 80 days. Because they grow straight down instead of spreading outward, they're one of the most vertically efficient root crops you can put in a pot. One thing worth knowing before you get discouraged: carrot seeds are painfully slow to germinate, sometimes 2 to 3 weeks, and a lot of beginners assume the seeds failed and give up right before the first sprouts finally show up. Keep the soil surface consistently damp during that wait instead of letting it crust over, and that alone makes the biggest difference in getting a full stand of seedlings. A lot of gardeners lose patience right around day 10. Assume nothing is happening, and resow on top of seeds that were about to sprout anyway, which just leaves you with a crowded mess of 2 overlapping plantings competing for the same inch of space. Beets are the closest thing to a cheat code on this list, because most people don't realize they're growing 2 vegetables at once. The root everyone pictures when they hear beet is only half the plant. The greens themselves are packed with iron and completely edible, so a single plant in that same 8-inch deep, 1/2 to 2 gallon container gives you both a root harvest and a leafy green harvest. Varieties like Ruby Queen mature in 50 to 60 days, and thinning to 2 to 3 inches apart keeps the roots from crowding each other out. Snip a few outer leaves for a salad while the root is still developing underground, and you're eating from that plant weeks before the final harvest even arrived. Beets also tolerate a fair amount of neglect once established, which makes them one of the more forgiving root crops if you're newer to growing anything underground at all. Green beans bring back the urgency, because this is one of the highest protein yields per square foot on the entire list, and bush varieties like Top Crop, Tender Crop, and Derby need no staking or support at all, unlike their pole bean cousins. They'll comfortably produce in a 1 to 2 gallon 8-inch deep container holding 2 to 3 plants, maturing in 45 to 65 days. Here's the thing that quietly sabotages a lot of balcony growers: wind. Hot, dry gusts dehydrate the flowers before they ever get the chance to set a pod. So if your space is exposed, keep the soil consistently moist and consider a temporary windbreak during flowering. Bush beans also tend to fire off 1 or 2 concentrated flushes rather than trickling out fruit all season, so staggering 2 or 3 containers a couple weeks apart, the same succession logic you used with lettuce, keeps a steadier supply coming instead of one overwhelming harvest followed by silence. And unlike a lot of the other crops on this list, beans actually improve the soil they're grown in, pulling nitrogen from the air and depositing some of it back into the container, which is worth remembering if you plan on reusing that container for a leafy green the following season. Green onions might be the most space-efficient plant you'll ever grow, and almost nobody puts them front and center because they don't look impressive. Because the plant grows almost entirely upward with a negligible lateral footprint, you can pack 3 to 5 plants into a container as shallow as 1/2 gallon to 2 gallons, only 4 to 6 inches deep. Varieties like Evergreen Bunching and Beltsville Bunching can even be grown at exceptionally high density in something as flat as a cake pan. The trade-off is time, 70 to 100 days to fully mature, so this is a slow-burn crop that rewards patience with almost zero space investment. Here's a trick that surprises people the first time they try it. You can regrow green onions indefinitely from kitchen scraps. Just leave about an inch of the white root end intact and replant it, which makes this one of the only vegetables on this entire list you may never need to buy seed for. Again, plant them as a border around a taller container crop like tomatoes or peppers, and you're effectively doubling your harvest from a single pot without the roots ever competing for the same depth. Sugar snap peas are the plant that breaks almost every rule this video has followed so far, because everything else on this list fears frost, and peas practically ask for it. Bush varieties like Bush Sugar Snap need only a 2-gallon 4 to 6 inch deep container with seeds spaced 2 to 3 inches apart, maturing in 60 to 70 days. Most people miss that you're not just harvesting pods. The young shoot tips are edible too and genuinely nutritious, so you can snip a few for a salad without touching your eventual pod harvest. Since peas thrive in cool weather and fade once summer heat arrives, they pair naturally with a follow-up planting of something heat-loving like beans or okra once the vines finish for the season. And even the so-called bush varieties still appreciate a small trellis or a few twiggy branches to climb, giving you noticeably heavier pod sets than letting the vines sprawl across bare soil. Which brings us to the plant that closes this list the same way it opened, with a genuine surprise. Number 15 is the eggplant, and it needs more warmth and more patience than anything else we've covered. 75 to 100 days in a 2 to 5 gallon container a full 12 inches deep. Varieties like Black Beauty and Dusky actually thrive in soil that's been allowed to warm and almost solarize in the sun, which is exactly why eggplant performs so well on a heat-trapping surface like a concrete patio or a dark balcony floor that other crops might resent. Like tomatoes and peppers, it's solanaceous, so the same nighttime temperature rules apply, and the same hand pollination trick works if your space doesn't get much insect activity. The payoff for the wait is a genuinely dense, heavy fruit yield that few other container crops can match pound for pound. One detail almost nobody mentions: the skin tufts the longer the fruit sits on the plant past ripeness, so harvest while it's still glossy rather than waiting for maximum size. A slightly smaller, glossy eggplant will beat an oversized, dull one every single time, and it's a fitting note to end the list on, because like almost everything on this list, the biggest harvest doesn't come from waiting the longest, it comes from paying attention at the right moment. 15 vegetables. Now picture your actual patio a few months from now. Tomatoes ripening on one side, a rotation of lettuce and radishes constantly turning over on the other, and enough green onions and herbs tucked into the gaps that you're genuinely feeding part of your kitchen from containers you set up in a single weekend. That's not a stretch. That's just what happens when you get the fundamentals right from day one. And getting those fundamentals right comes down to a short list of things that apply no matter which of these 15 you actually grow. Keep the soil one continuous column from top to bottom. Skip the gravel layer entirely, and just cover the drainage holes with fine mesh or landscape cloth. Feed with a slow-release granular mix at planting, then switch to a weekly liquid feed once the plant hits rapid growth around 3 to 4 weeks in. Skip the water-retaining gel crystals. They turn hydrophobic once they dry out and tear apart root hairs as they shrink and swell. Bring tender crops in before frost. Leave the cold hardy ones like kale and spinach right where they are. And when the season finally ends, clean your containers instead of reusing dirty soil, because the 30-minute bleach soak now saves you a season of root rot later. That's the whole system. Let me know in the comments which one of these 15 you're planting first. Hit like if this changed how you're setting up your containers this year, and subscribe, because this channel only exists to get you a bigger harvest out of a smaller space than you thought was possible.